My name is Rosa Murray and I'm a member of the core group of the Scottish Laity Network. Tonight, it's my great privilege to welcome you to the first evening of our Advent journey in 2023, waiting in grief for peace and the power of lament. As is our tradition, let us now spend time in prayer reflecting on the signs of the times. We invite you to listen to an Aramaic chant of the second Beatitude according to Matthew. Tonight, it's my great pleasure to welcome our companion and friend to Scottish Laity Network, Alison Phipps. Alison holds a UNESCO Chair in Refugee Integration through Languages and the Arts at the University of Glasgow, where she's also Professor of Languages and Intercultural Studies. She's based in the School of Education at the University of Glasgow, where she uses creative decolonising and restorative methods to teach widely in refugee studies, critical multilingual studies, religious and spiritual education, anthropology, and intercultural education and education for non-violence. Alison, you're so welcome. Thank you for joining us. And before you start to speak, can I just encourage people that throughout Alison's talk, if thoughts, comments or questions come to you, please put them into the chat and then we can have a discussion with Alison when she's finished her presentation. Alison, thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Rosa, and to the Scottish Catholic Laity Network and Core Group for inviting me back. Again, it's been really lovely to be with you over the last few years on these Zoom calls during both Lent and Advent. And this year, I'm particularly glad to see that one of your companions coming up has also joined, that Muriel is in the room as well, Miriam Pearson, who is just back from Tiberias in Galilee, and who I was delighted to see just recently, a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to share with you some reflections on the Gaza that I know and on the work that I've done in the Gaza Strip over 15 years. And I'm going to share that in two ways. One, using words from a Muslim friend and brother, as we call each other, brother and sister. So a Muslim friend and brother who lives in the Gaza Strip and who has been in constant touch with me since the 7th of October and since the aggression on Gaza began. And with the words of another Palestinian friend from Bethlehem, who is a Christian, who has been sharing words which are sustaining him as he waits in grief for hope. I'm going to share some images with you. I'll share my screen in a moment. And then I'm going to also share some words that I've been writing as a meditation, trying to make a little bit of sense of things for myself and sense of what people are bringing to me to try and find understanding in what it is that we are seeing, in the atrocities that we are witnessing, and in the difficulties that we are having in coming to words and coming to terms, quite literally, with the events in the Holy Land. So I'm going to just share my screen to start with, and let me find my share button. Where is it? There we go. That's it. And I want to begin by sharing a dream, because of course Advent is a time for dreamers. Advent is when we look to the prophets. Advent is when we think of Joseph and the dreams that Joseph had, and we think of a world that is very thin between the dream world and the world of a reality, but also where we know that we're never far away from the nightmare of the slaughter of the innocents, the nightmare of a taxation system that counted people for their place within an occupying power in Rome. And I had a dream a few weeks ago. And in my dream, my friend was very present to me. And I wrote to him after I'd had my dream and told him of the dream and what I had dreamt. And I said this to him: I dreamed your freedom last night, my brother. It was so vivid. I was in the middle of struggling here and close to despair and without hope. And suddenly you called, my phone rang, and you just said, I have the most amazing news. We are free. I pray that God has given me the dream to give hope in the darkness. And I praise your God, Allah, and my God for this gift in the night. And my friend wrote back and he said, may Allah and God make this dream come sooner. We dream and strongly believe the birds will break the cage and siege will break the cage and siege, that the birds will happily return to their warm nests, will grow new and stronger feathers, will fly higher in the skies of freedom, will sing louder the songs of peace and freedom. We are free. A dream becomes true. We are free. It was 2012 when I was able to enter the Gaza Strip for the first time. We've been working on many projects in the School of Education at the University of Glasgow, and this was the very first project that we worked on, a project called Lifelong Learning in Palestine. And our job when we went to the Gaza Strip was to meet with women in particular, to find out what the prospects were for employment for women in a context where 75% unemployment reigns for young people and for young graduates, and where it's really important, particularly for the mothers, that their children find employment so that they might not end up in the militias. We were there for International Women's Day, and during that time I saw a cake that was bigger than any cake I have ever seen in my whole life. It was pretty much the size of a mattress, and it had been carried across the strip on the back of a motorbike, because that's the main way that people get around on incredibly bumpy roads. It was cut with a giant sword, a ceremonial knife, and it was full of candles and flaring and dance. And it was a really joyous time to be together. And during my time, I was taken on a tour of the Gaza Strip by my friend. He drove us the full range of the 45 kilometers by 6 kilometers that the strip inhabits, which is pretty much a space along the central belt corridor from Glasgow to Edinburgh. 45 miles is roughly what it takes. So it doesn't take long to cover the distance. There are 3 main roads, one at the top of the strip, one in the middle of the strip, and one at the bottom of the strip. And he drove us all the way through them. He took us to all the refugee camps. He took us into some of the ancient mosques, into places of worship. He took us to the cemetery where the dead are buried. He took us right up to the Erez checkpoint, and we had to turn around very quickly because there were soldiers coming towards us with guns. He took us through the areas of Beit Hanun and Beit Laia and Jabalia in the north of Gaza, which had been bombed during Operation Cast Lead, which had preceded our visit. He took us to his home, and we had magloube, an absolutely glorious Palestinian dish made with chicken and rice and unbelievable delicious things, and decorated with almonds and dates. And we sat for a long time in his house, and we drank tea, a very special tea that is made in the Gaza Strip with sage added to it and some sugar. We spent time there also as there was a build-up moving towards another aggression, and it was becoming quite a fearful place. And we were looked after very kindly and very carefully by our hosts. At one point, we were taken up to one of the campuses that was built on the area of land that the Israeli settlers had left back, I think, in 2005. And we were taken around the houses and shown the insides of them and shown the bunkers. And we were told that these are the only bunkers in the Gaza Strip. These were places for air raid shelters for the settlers, but that because of the need for space in the Gaza Strip, then there weren't bunkers for the majority population. One of our hosts said to us, when it is very quiet, we don't say Sabbath, we say curfew. And we experienced times whilst we were there when it was very quiet and we couldn't move around the strip because the bombings were starting. This is Gaza Harbour. This is the Gaza you don't see in the news at the moment. These beautiful yellow and blue fishing boats, the traditional Palestinian fishing boats, the blue sea of the Eastern Mediterranean, the palm trees, the beach that goes along the 45 miles of the strip. This is very close to Ashkelon and the Israeli border, where this is taken from in Gaza City, and the harbour area. Much of that harbour wall was made from rubble that was cleared after previous Israeli bombings. The Israeli Navy has a presence in the waters between 4 kilometres and 6 kilometres out to sea. And whilst in theory, the fishermen are allowed to go up to 6 kilometres for their fishing, in practice, they've only been able to go up to 3 or 4 kilometres before they've risked having their boats destroyed by artillery fire from the Israeli warships. This is one of the houses that was vacated when the settlers left the Gaza Strip, and when the Gaza Strip came under the administrative rule of Hamas, and Israel became an occupying force with responsibility under international law for the well-being of the citizens within the state of Israel, including those who are part of the occupied Palestinian territories. This is now part of, or was part of, the campus of Al-Quds University. The Vice-Chancellor who took us round said, when he opened up those houses, the people who lived here were very afraid. The people who lived here were very afraid. And he took me down and showed me the entrance to the bunker underneath the houses. And he opened the door and we went in, and it was a prayer room. And the people had decided that when these houses were vacated, they should be used for education and for prayer. And so we went in together, and my colleagues and I observed Friday prayers together, I in my tradition and they in theirs. We came back up and walked across campus, and the Vice Chancellor pointed to the sky and said, "Can you hear that?" And we said, "Yes." And there was a buzzing noise. And then he said, "Do you have friends in Israel? Do the Israelis know you are here?" And we said no. And then about 200 yards from where we were, a bomb fell and we heard it explode. And he said to us in a very ordinary, everyday, matter-of-fact way, "Ah, they are bombing now." And we carried on walking across the campus. He took us to the area where the students of his university had an art department. And he took us to show us the artwork that the students had made after Operation Cast Lead, and of the scenes that they'd witnessed. These are scenes from back in 2011, but they will be very familiar to you. This is from an artwork which counted the dead. And when you zoomed out of these individual portrait faces, it spelt the word in Arabic, Gaza. My Palestinian Christian friend from Bethlehem, when he heard I was coming to speak to you, said to me, "Please take my greetings of peace to my brothers and sisters in Christ. And please share these passages because these are on my heart." And the first one from Matthew 2:18. "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning." Rachel is weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. And it's a passage, of course, which we don't first encounter in Matthew. We encounter it throughout what we call the Old Testament and what our Jewish brothers and sisters call the Hebrew Bible. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. And then he shared a passage from Luke 23:28. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. Do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children." And whilst I don't greatly know what these words mean in their comfort to my Palestinian Christian friend, I do know that they are words which are given to us by the prophets and by Christ to guide us in times of our deepest mourning and in our vigils for peace as we wait in hope for peace to come. And I also have come to know that one of the things that we do with biblical texts is to take them often in our liberal sensibilities in the Western world as moral injunctions, when actually maybe they are just descriptions of a matter of fact, of what's to come or what is happening. And I was really minded of this earlier this week when my husband returned from a vigil at St James the Less Church in Bishopbriggs, led by our friend Paul Watson. And Paul had asked the congregation the question, what is the deepest darkness that you can imagine? What is the deepest darkness that you can imagine? And Robert, my husband, thought of our mutual friend in Gaza, who has also eaten at our table as I have at his, and thought, that is the deepest darkness, and I can imagine. And then he stopped and thought, no, because Alison is reading the words of this man to me that come to her phone daily. And these are the words of peace. And these are words of love. And these are words of justice. And these are words that affirm freedom. So this is not the deepest darkness that this man is inhabiting. And then he thought of the people who are pressing the buttons and dropping the bombs, and the people who are engaging in violence in the Holy Land. And he thought to himself, when Jesus says it is better for a man to lose his life than lose his soul, perhaps that is not a moral injunction, but a description of what it must be like to have lost your soul, such that you can order at gunpoint doctors to leave babies in incubators in a hospital to die. And that is the deepest darkness, perhaps, that we can imagine. And yet Jesus says in the first words of the resurrection, the ones he says when he walks into rooms that are so frightened that they dare not open up, Jesus says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The Vice-Chancellor continued to take us round through the artwork, and he said with a twinkle in his eye, it's very hard to get art materials in the Gaza Strip, but the Israelis are very kind and they send us lots of materials. They send them down from the skies and from the sea, and sometimes they bring them in tanks. And so he showed us this, which you may be able to discern is actually a dove of peace made out of the armaments from one of the armoured vehicles that was left after Operation Cast Lead and the fighting that had ensued. He showed us the bodies breaking out of the separation barrier made in artwork. He showed us the women of Palestine made in the leaves and the seeds and the colours of the land, holding up a dove of peace to the sky. He showed us art materials in chains. And at every step, he would say, Salam alaikum, peace be with you, peace be upon you. And the word was made flesh. A child shall be born. We wait in grief for hope. And the word was made flesh and dwelt among us. At the moment, we're in a pause. Early this morning, with 11 minutes to go, we thought the war might start again. But we've managed somehow as an international community, ragged, difficult, divided as we are, we've managed to create another day of a pause. And whilst we yearn for a permanent ceasefire, we've managed to make a pause. My friend wrote to me, Alison, it's a really peaceful pause. We could move safely. We could visit my elderly sister and we will be able to have a deep sleep tonight and not expect dot, 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 dot. My friend's message trails off. He does not have words to describe the horror. None of us do. I wander across the university campus, walk around Glasgow, and bump into friends and colleagues. The greetings have changed. How are you? I mean, aside from the situation, people ask. I can't bear it, they say. I've stopped watching, they say. It's too awful for words, they say. I cannot comprehend it, they say. My friend's daughter-in-law is expecting a baby imminently, as is my daughter. We have joked about being grandparents together in our respective family. It's his first grandchild. Concerning babies, he writes, about 150 babies are born every day in Gaza, some in shelter schools, in hosted homes, as the main hospitals were all destroyed. Most pregnant women in such terrible conditions have to deliver babies through a cesarean operation without anaesthetic, and in a labour and delivery ward that is fully occupied by increasing numbers of badly injured people. The delivery ward in our hometown hospital was closed to treat hundreds of Palestinian injured. My own daughter, coming close to her time, knows she can have an anaesthetic, that someone will drive her to hospital in Glasgow, that there will be sterile dressings and needles, and careful monitoring of blood pressure and health should she need a section. My daughter knows there will be pain relief, and that the family are close by and safe too. My friend writes, almost every house and family in my hometown is hosting at least 2 more families, crammed in flats and houses, stores, shacks, any shelter. This created such agonies and shortages of everything. After bombing many bakeries and preventing fuel and glass, we are at home making bread for a large family on wood after struggling. And we are still to get some flour. Yet it is our homeland, and we want to live in dignity, and we live on in hope, waiting in grief for peace. The sunshine will rise. In a world where words fail to make peace, we are both, as academics in the arts and humanities, reaching deep, first for greetings of peace to one another, then for a documentary or reporting, and then for poetry. The philosopher Martin Heidegger, a figure with a difficult history, known for not speaking out properly against the rise of Hitler and National Socialism, wrote, "Poetically, the human dwells." Heidegger's work is often opaque, hard to fathom, full of locutions. He's forever going round the houses, not naming the issue, it seems. The sunshine will rise. I've been a critic of Heidegger's work and stance myself. I've hesitated in using some of it. I've wondered. And now I find I am understanding anthropologically as everyone greets me by failing to find words with which to tell me that they are witnessing a genocide, a slaughter of innocents, that they cannot believe that the Israeli Defense Force ordered medical staff caring for premature babies in incubators to abandon their patients. Let's repeat that. Premature babies in incubators. A child in a manger. At gunpoint. These are the words that don't flow, but fail, hesitate, and are turned into the situation that we can't watch. Words fail us, and we fail words. My friend in Gaza and I regroup every day, gather ourselves and keep writing back and forth, like the tide on the Gaza beach. We've now done this through 5 wars, aggressions, but this is the worst. This is beyond the telling of it. And there it is, That phrase, which shows that some atrocities, some horrors are so absolute that they tear the fabric of language and nothing we can say is adequate. We do not understand, and the words we reach for don't come close to expressing the visceral, nauseous fear in our bodies all the time. There is a chilling atmosphere too here, in a world where to call for a ceasefire can be characterized as anti-Semitic, where joining a march calling for peace can be seen as a hate march, where a post on social media in the occupied Palestinian territories can lead to indefinite detention as a hostage of the Israeli state without trial, where the world of opinion is so divided that my Jewish friends say they feel uncomfortable if people speak out against the aggression, that this belies any true understanding of the state of terror that living in the shadow of the Holocaust, that imprescriptible event, means for the people of Israel and for people of Jewish faith in particular. That trauma has been visited unto the third and fourth generation. And extreme militarization is the consequence, a militarization that has failed to make anyone secure or bring anyone peace. And in this fiat atmosphere, where every word is weighed, measured, and found wanting, Palestinian and pro-Palestinian friends are enraged by what they see as the green lighting and collusion of the US and much of Europe and the UK government in what may indeed be officially characterized as a genocide one day by the appropriate bodies. It may indeed be judged that war crimes and multiple breaches of international humanitarian law have occurred and have been perpetuated by the State of Israel in breach of its responsibilities as an occupying power in the International Criminal Court. Caught in the limbo where our words fail, between fear of offence and visceral fear, between horror at atrocity and revulsion at what human beings are capable of, we can only work with silence, law, poetry, and prayer, with the white space of the page and the attempt to form sentences, and with sentences, wise judges in courts of law and of the prophets have formed for us in the past as guides. It's a good thing we are being careful. It's a good thing that we are holding to the language of international humanitarian law. It's a good thing that we hold to the law and the prophets. It's a good thing that we turn to poetry and prayer, or find it as a solace in the messages to our friends. I see my colleagues in Gaza writing poems even as the bombs rain down, praying to Allah even as the bombs rain down. As academics and artists, we've been meeting to think, to hold a line of critical vigilance around the ways in which we might speak and write of what is unfolding. There, I've just done it again. Words failed me as I wrote, as I've glossed over the description with a "what is unfolding" second attempt, where we might speak and write of the horror that appears to us. And I am one of 800 scholars of genocide who have signed a letter warning of this, of what appears to us to be another genocide. My friend writes, my daughter-in-law is okay, counting days with so much apprehension and fear, as this is her first baby and experience. At the time of delivery, we hope I can take her to hospital safely. We are living in total, predominant, and dominant uncertainty, as none know what might happen now, or the next minute, or hour, or day. When we could sleep, we don't know if we are going to wake up. Waking up safely is a dream to every Palestinian and family in Gaza. The speed and variety of the many bad and sad events on reality is beyond description. I would guess, he says, the media covers less than 10% of what happens around the clock for 43 days and nights. This should, of course, be a refugee emergency evacuation, like the one which befell Ukraine in 2022. There should, of course, be around 2 million people in emergency refugee camps or being evacuated to countries offering aid, as with Ukraine. It's what happens when war breaks out. But not here, not here, not here, because Palestinians are already refugees in the main, and within the state of Israel as an occupying power. This is a situation so strange, so unfathomable. For 75 years, it needs a whole separate United Nations agency, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, to deal with this 75-year-old humanitarian disaster. Any aid arriving is meagre and nowhere near close to adequate, even in the pause when aid has been traded for hostage freedoms. But, writes my friend, but a new dawn of peace will emerge. And there are 2 doves of peace as emojis. My friend uses these all the time, as do I. We found ourselves in the strange rhythm of war. Technically, this is an aggression, not a war, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967, Francesca Albanese. And yes, that is her full title, because it's a title devised in the United Nations family to be one that is acceptable within this fraught space. The reportage style of the messages continue between the poetry in the pause. Tomorrow, says my friend, we all will pick up olives in our land, and we will produce olive oil, though we should have done so a month ago. In brief, it is a great relief to all in Gaza. I smile. I've seen my friend's olive trees, and I know his love of the land. He's seen my allotment too. A day later, I receive more news. We happily harvested almost 1 ton of olives today with my sons and 10 workers. Tomorrow it will be squeezed as mills are very busy and don't have electricity. But one is happy not to lose the harvest of this year, as we are more than 1 month late. My concern has temporarily shifted from the sick feeling in my stomach every morning for the last weeks, wondering if my friend is alive, anxiously watching for news, to a concern for his olives. More news arrives of the olives. Making use of the war pause with great relief yesterday, I was busy with my sons squeezing olives. Mills are busy and lack electricity and fuel, but after 24 hours of queuing, we went home happily with several gallons of olive oil straight away. In the evening, we finished distributing almost all the olive oil to the displaced families after keeping something for my large family. It is a great pleasure to see smiles on the faces of these families and to hear their praise, making and promoting peace to all humans. I don't know if I would have such strength, such courage, such generosity to share the first fruits, as is the tradition, our tradition, the tradition of that land. But I do know this, that these words we insist on making and sharing between us, these words which cross the blockade and share the fears, that this is where it is kept alive, the hope of peace, of children born in safety, with care and medical attention, of olives pressed into oil without fear, of a sharing of the fruits of the land. For the word is made flesh and dwells among us, full of grace and truth.
البتول الضابط الخليقة بأسرها بقبضة اليوم يولد من البتول الضابط الخليقة بأسرها بقبضة اليوم يولد من البتول الضابط الخليقة بأسرها في قبضة الذي هو بجوهره غير ملموس يدرج في الأقمطة كطفل الإله الذي ثبت السماوات قديما منذ الباب يتكئ في مسود الذي أمطر للشعب منان في القاف يبتغي من الثديين لبنا فتن البيعة يستدعي المجوس وابن الأغراب يستقبل منهم الهدايا نسجد لميلادك أيها المسيح نسجد لميلادك أيها المسيح نسجد لميلادك أيها المسيح فأرنا ظهورك الإله
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I wonder if we just want perhaps a minute just to take some space to think and reflect on what we might want to talk about, think about, ask Alison any questions or share thoughts, feelings, reflections. And if I could ask if you could put them into the chat and we can pick them up from there for discussion. Thank you. One of the things I'd like to ask Alison is, I think I'm aware of, in this war and linking it to the media, it's so polarised, divided, and people always wanting to begin the discussion with a clarification of what side everybody's on. And once that's established, we can move on to talk about it. And it always seems to me to be something that then punctures the actual story and the debate. And I think what you've done tonight has been to start with stories and real stories, authentic stories from people. And I think what I'm completely inspired by and staggered by, as I'm sure you are too, and others, is the actual signs of hope and desire for peace in such darkness.
Yeah.
And the way they're being treated. To still hold on, I find that, I don't even know if that's a question, I just find it mesmerising. And I find it personally very hopeful when, as you point out, and many do, we run out of words.
I think there's, for me, as a watcher of words, I'm a professional watcher of words. It's what I'm paid on behalf of society to do, is to watch words and to work with words from many languages, and to think critically about them and to try and sit with the problems that they raise. And one of the things that I know happens you're all just going to get my 101 lecture in semantics now. One of the things that I know happens in times of great international or national upheaval is that the words we normally use fail. And that happened, a good example of how that happened was when the Berlin Wall fell, particularly in Germany. And people did not have words to describe what was happening. And so all the Germans that I knew, they had one word, which was Wahnsinn, which for those of you who speak German will know, it means this is madness. And people were just going around and greeting each other, rather as I was describing there, not with hello, how are you, but with Wahnsinn, just as I'm being greeted with, I don't know what to say. And gradually language began to solidify, and the cultural academic, cultural studies academic, Raymond Williams, spoke about this as social experiences that are in solution, and they're not yet solved. They're insoluble, and we haven't therefore got language for them. And gradually, the Germans began to speak of this as Die Wende, and that's what it's now known as, the time of the turning. We talk about it as the fall of the Berlin Wall. We have a phrase, as we often do in English for this, but the Germans have a word, Die Wende. And I've seen it happen with other events as well. So the refugee crisis is what the arrival of many Syrians into the hospitality crisis in Europe has been characterized as. And it takes a while for these words to solidify. And I think we're in a phase at the moment which is very acute, but where literally words fail us and we don't know what to say. But also we're in a space of a great deal of self-censorship and censorship, because we are witnessing not just to the genocide that is unfolding, but also to as somebody described it to me the other day, a monstering in the public domain of anyone from another side in public. And we saw the decision yesterday of the BBC to abandon its investigative forms with Newsnight and to just have these panel debates where people speak appallingly to each other and public discourse collapses. Now, I don't think that what we are witnessing in Gaza is a matter for debate or argument. And certainly not from a country that is involved as we are in sending a great deal of military assistance to the Israelis, and that was involved in the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which started at least the modern era of trouble, and was involved in the 1948 Nakba. So I think we need to be careful of the judgments that we raise, and that when we are in these discussions, and we're witnessing these all the time, and we're afraid we're going to be asked them, and the question is, but do you condemn? And we've seen this taken to an absolute extreme with the Palestinian ambassador to the United Kingdom on the television, who was asked after he had lost 6 members of his family that very day if he condemned Hamas. Now, this is a man who is a diplomat. This is a man who has many times condemned the atrocities of Hamas. This is a man who's lived through the struggles of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the times when it took up arms, the times when it laid down arms, the times when it has really felt as though it has no power whatsoever. And he is being asked on the day when he has lost 6 members of his family if he condemns his own side, his own people, his own place in that story. And if he agrees that all Palestinians bear the guilt, the collective guilt, and therefore should be on the end of the collective punishment. And again, collective punishment is illegal under international law. So we're seeing these absolutely extraordinary forms of what we call logic chopping in the trade, getting people in with the weeds so nothing can be said, which is one of the things that journalists quite like to do. And some of my best friends are journalists and are very good ones. And my feeling is that as people of Christ, as people to whom the risen Christ said, don't be afraid, peace be with you, then we have an answer, and that answer is peace. That answer is the way of peace. And the way of peace is a way that has to include justice and truth and reconciliation. But those are the things that are the lessons of Christ. Those are his descriptions of darkness and his descriptions of light. That is what we know from his teachings. That is what we know from the way he lived his life. That is what we know from when he broke bread and took wine. That is what we know from when he forgave his enemies. That is what we know is the way of peace. And peace is hard work, and it's daily work, and it's not easy. And in our own homes and families, we find it difficult. Often it's hard to sit at table with people, even in our own family, because we've fallen out with them so badly. But we know that unless we come back to table and share the first fruits and share the bread and the wine and come together as you do for the Mass and as we do in my tradition for the Lord's Supper or for the Eucharist, that unless we do these things, which are the things of peace, then we don't know how to practice peace on a daily basis. And I'm really struck by what my friend did with the olive oil, with the first fruits, with the taking and the sharing. And olive oil it's a sacred oil. It is the oil of life. It is obviously, as he will tell me time and again, it is the best olive oil in the world that grows in his refugee camp. But I think for me that is where we can stand, and that is standing in the breach. That is standing between these divides, and that is something that we can say. And I've found, as someone who is in many ways these days something of a public intellectual and figure, that I've been lent on very hard to give a direction. And I have in the end found that what I have are the words of Jesus Christ and of the prophets and the prayers of our tradition and of the practical actions that we undertake, and the words of international humanitarian law, which involves the Rome Statutes and the Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention and the Genocide Convention, and that these have given me a great deal of support and help to know what is and is not within bounds at a time when we're right to be careful with words. And so I think we don't need to answer that question if we're ever asked, but do you condemn? Because that question is only about war. It's only about division. It's only about turning people against each other. It's only about accusation. It's only about a very shallow moral condemnation of the other without any context or understanding. And it's devoid of a space for forgiveness. And of course, again, the good news of Christ is that we are forgiven people, that we live as forgiven people. We do not live in a place of permanent guilt, but that has been taken from us and is taken from us day after day. And so I find that refusing to answer the question, do you condemn, and actually saying there is a way of peace, and affirming that, and that there are ways of peace. And at the end, this is a political conflict. It cannot be solved with a military conflict. And it is the people who pray and the people who negotiate who will prevail, as they have done in every situation of genocide, of apartheid, of human rights abuse that we have ever encountered in the world. And so that's where I draw at the moment a degree of quiet confidence. And I think of those words of Isaiah for this season, in quietness and confidence shall be your peace. And I think that that's something that we, friends, can claim quite simply as ours for this moment in time, and as something that we might be able to hold to as a way forward.
Thanks, Alison. I'm just going to read through a few comments and pick up on a couple of questions as well, or expressions. Just a few lovely thoughts here. One extraordinary and rich reflection. Thank you, Alison. It's hard to know what to say after Alison's reflection. I felt powerless. What can we do? There are times in one's life when words cannot describe man's inhumanity to man. There can be no words to describe what is happening, but the powerful images will live with me along with your reflection. Many blessings on you and yours, and prayers for those you know. And how can we prepare through Advent this year for our celebration of Christmas in a way that somehow reflects the suffering of the babies in the land we call holy, the place where Jesus suffered and where the people are being hurt today? How can we somehow live through Advent in a way that's faithful to the situation in Palestine? And I might just stop there and let you comment, Alison, and then come back to a few others.
They're beautiful reflections, and they're really nourishing and nurturing and raw and honest, I think. Yesterday was the International Day of solidarity with the Palestinian people. And again, I was finding myself kind of being asked, what can we do? And also, how can we prepare in a spirit of waiting for peace, because we are waiting for this peace to be extended day on day. And we know it may be shattered and we may see worse things to come. Although every day I think we cannot see anything worse than what we have seen. And I was really reflecting on the things that might help us as waiting in peace. And yesterday, as part of the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, I went down to Kelvin Grove Museum, and that might be something that some of you in Glasgow could do, just to visit the Dar Yassin monument. Dar Yassin was a village destroyed in the Nakba, the first disaster for the Palestinian people, on the 9th of April, 1948. And the stone was laid on the 9th of April, 1988 by the Lord Provost, the then Lord Provost, Robert Gray. And it's just a very simple headstone by the War Memorial by Kelvin Grove Museum, at the back of Kelvin Grove Museum. And I went to visit it just to pay my respects, really. I'm not sure what that does, but it feels like it's an appropriate thing, just as many people will pay their respects, during November as a real season of remembering the dead. And when I got there, it was covered in flowers. There were red roses and white roses and green leaves. It was just a really beautiful sight. And I went and laid I laid a piece of sage to think of the tea that I will one day drink with my friend. So that might be something to do, or see if there's a place that's symbolic that could be a little place of visiting through Advent. The last couple of days, Stella Quines has put on a play called The Gaza Monologues. I think it's recorded and you might want to catch it. There's a wonderful group of poets and playwrights and actors, including Hannah Lavery and Tawana Sitoli, who've been part of performing that both at the Tramway and at the Lyceum. But it's a really powerful play, and we worked with its creator and some of the people who acted in it from Zimbabwe as part of UNESCO's Art Lab. But I think you might find it online, and it's a beautiful, powerful set of words that might deepen understanding. You might want to learn a bit about Sabeel, which is liberation theology for Palestine. And I can probably put a link in the chat, but they've also got a new statement and a Kairos statement for taking action for Palestine, and really looking at the ways in which, just for those who don't know what Sabeel do, they enable us to think using liberation theology about the ways in which the understanding of the Bible has been very skewed against the Palestinian people, and with an understanding of the Promised Land that maybe needs some critical revision or some critical understanding, because of what it's led to has been so against the teachings of Christ. And Sabeel are a very powerful set of thinkers and theologians working for peace in Palestine, and with a UK branch. So you might want to prepare and use some of their materials, and they're online. If you're more legally minded, I mean, I just think Francesca Albanese, this extraordinary, quite young Italian lawyer, human rights lawyer, who is the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in the Palestinian territories occupied since 1967. She is saying some amazing things. She's writing some amazing things. And if you need and feel that you want to understand international law more, as part of thinking about law and what it can do, then her work and her writing and her speeches, she's recently given a lecture which is online on YouTube in Australia. She's very clear. She's very feisty. She knows her stuff, and she does not suffer fools. And I personally have found that quite cathartic in a space of equivocation. I found her, but what do you mean? No, what do you mean? No, that is not what it is. This is what it is. I am speaking here legally and precisely. And she's just it's very helpful. You feel a relief after you've heard her. And that might be something for some of you, if you're legally minded, to have a look at.
In the chat, Alison.
Sorry?
Put her name in the chat.
Yeah, I'll put her name in the chat.
And
I will.
Sabeel, we've got actually Omar Harmony is coming to speak.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
He's been before, so he's coming the next on the 14th. So yeah, he'll be with us then. Just a few other thoughts and a few questions coming in here, so I'm conscious of time. The seeds of hatred must be being sown in children and young people's hearts in Palestine and Israel, and so be carried on, unless what? So sorry, can't find the way. Alison, your deeply moving experiences with your friends, past and present, is silencing me. It's awesome that the heroic faith and courage, these men and women who have such strong hope and wisdom, pray every day for peace, reconciliation, and healing, and to rejoice in and with the God who loves them. Thank you. I have no words. It's a simple symbol, and this from Muriel, who's going to be speaking to us next week. Welcome, Muriel. But following the reflection of the church leaders and patriarchs that Advent should be reflective, we are asked not to light the second Advent candle, the Bethlehem candle. So there's a form of action we could maybe ask our churches, our communities, and Muriel has put a link there in the chat to that. Similar time, yes, we wait for peace and lament and do so first. Do we not also work for justice, also learning and peacefully seeking justice?
Yeah, I mean, just on that one, I was asked in the first week of the conflict to put a statement out from the UNESCO Chair, um, and um, and again asked what could we do, and I will pop that in the chat. I mean, it's a statement with some of the legalese from the UN in it, but it's got a whole set of practical actions that we can take, that you might find helpful. From writing to our elected representatives. I mean, we've seen what a power that has had in the call for a ceasefire in the Scottish Parliament, and really seeing the Scottish Parliament perhaps at its best. I mean, I know there have been times where differences have been laid aside, but to witness, a motion from the SNP for a ceasefire voted on by Labour, and then an amendment offered by Labour voted on by the SNP, and that amendment being to request a referral to the International Criminal Court. This is good lawmaking and good use of parliamentary time, and I was really heartened by that. But I will definitely look up this statement that we have on a call for peace and some of the actions that might be helpful. Which are also around, supporting medical aid for Palestine, the Red Cross and SCIAF, all of whom, and particularly SCIAF, because they're in the back room, I do know have a way of getting aid into Gaza at the moment. There are routes open. They do have an appeal out. So if money is what you're able to give, then SCIAF do have a way to get aid in when it's allowed across the border. And I think other actions are just about learning about the history of and being discriminating in your use of language, knowing that our Jewish brothers and sisters are really suffering and very afraid. And that some of that for them is a horror that we share with them at what is being done in our names, in their names, in our name. And finally, I just think, the best security system we have is always going to be dialogue, and that practicing that in our communities is a really important gesture as we continue to struggle for justice and peace, and think about decisions we make about our resources, what we have, considering what we buy, looking at the origins of what we buy, supporting Hadil, who are a wonderful Palestinian producer based in Edinburgh, who certainly supply us with gifts and beautiful embroidery, and have supplied us with olive oil in the past. But maybe just looking at those as things that you can do positively to say, if we put our money where our mouth is, then that's a way of showing our commitments to justice and peace. So I think those are just some of the things that we can do.
Thanks, Alison. Some more comments here. Alison, what you've just said to answer, do you condemn? To say there is a way of peace. You're so wise. Thank you. God bless you. And Alison, how do you care for yourself in these tragic conditions and stories? I thank God that I'm here tonight to hear your words, Alison. Thank you for sharing your friend's words with us. I will remember him, his family, and his people in my prayers and continue to pray for peace. Mike has put the links up to Sabine. Robert's put other links up. I can't properly, yes, to Francesca Albanese. And you also have put her name up. Mike has put up the Palestinian representatives' details and a speech that was given, and the links are there to be able to read. And another comment here is, I've been really helped to understand and learn more about the situation of people in the Middle East by the charity Embrace the Middle East. Maybe we can make a decision to seek to learn about more about what's happening, how it started by reading and listening through Advent. Robert, you've put something up at embraceme.org. I don't know what that is. You're on mute, Robert.
That was the one that Anne mentioned.
Okay, all right, sorry, thanks, okay. And Alison, you've put up resources as well. And buy from Zaytown as well, if I got the right pronunciation there.
Zaytoon. It means
Um,
oil. Zaytoon or zayti is oil in Arabic.
and all the links will be sent out with the recording that go on. Any other questions
Can I come back to that lovely caring question about how I look
Yes.
after myself? Because I think it is very important. And it's not an easy question. I mean, I found this last year the hardest year of my life. And this last couple of months have been, as you can probably tell from the writing I've just done, beyond the telling of it. And knowing that a lot of people are looking to me for a way, and knowing that that is going to be a narrow way, and trying to find it without doing more damage in a situation where things can be inflamed so easily has been very difficult. So within this specific set of circumstances, one of the first things I do is make sure I have people who I am accountable to. And within the work I do at the university, then that is the Vice Chancellor, and that is my head of media, because I'll be working in the public domain. And so I make sure that they know what I'm doing. I also make sure to ask them to do things. So, I've been asking from the very start that the University of Glasgow might call for a permanent ceasefire and for a release of all hostages. And it took a month for it to get through Senior Management Committee, but it's got through Senior Management Committee and it has been done. And we had an internal communication, I think nearly 2 weeks ago now, calling for a permanent ceasefire. And there has been a real commitment to letting people know that they have a right to freedom of expression and they have a right to academic freedom, and that within those rights, we must be careful with one another. And we have then, as part of care for our community, also found care for ourselves. And what I was saying before about the words of the law and the words of prayer and poetry being important, those have been the two things that have really held me and helped me and sustained me. So regularly going back and a little bit geeky like reading law. I'm not a lawyer, but I find lawyers really strangely reassuring when I read legal determinations, rather like the Rwanda determination. I mean, it's a beautiful piece of legal determination for those of us working in that space. And similarly, some of the statements, one of the statements on freedom of expression, again, I'll share it from the United Nations Special Rapporteurs on cultural rights, on human rights, on freedom of speech, some excellent, helpful, freeing words from them. So that's one of the things I do to care for myself. I make sure I check that I'm not out of line, that I'm not going crazy. And the other space, of course, is a space of prayer. And I've been really heartened by the way I know the University of Edinburgh, but other campuses have really moved to prayer very quickly. And I think I take this as quite a heartening move, that we have had vigils. And I sat down with our chaplain and said, what should we do? What should we do? This is such a difficult space. And I just said, we can't have words. We must have silence and candlelight. Because if we put symbols in, they will offend or hurt or exclude. And if we put words in, that will do the same, because words are symbols. And so to step out of that space and instead to say, we will, a little like Muriel's suggestion of keeping that second candle, the Bethlehem candle, unlit. We will not light our words, but we will keep silence. And I've been in the vigils, the silent vigils we've held at Glasgow University Chapel, and in the back space, so that it's something that is a safe space for as many as can feel safe in that space. And it has been really moving. I mean, the space has been full of people in tears, quietly just bringing their grief. And I have found it a very soothing space to just sit in silence and ready myself for what might be next. So those are things that I do to nourish myself. I try, if I can, to get to the allotment and just leave it there and turn the compost heap. I have found church to be a very important, quiet place, particularly if I'm not asked to do anything, if I can just sit with it all, rather than being volunteered. And I have found being with family, just being close to loved ones, sitting at table with friends, and just being able to talk in, sometimes hushed tones, sometimes not talk at all. But be with people who know me and know me well. I found those things really important. And it just made me think quite a lot of, what Jesus does with his disciples, the friends who are the ones he can talk to, or the ones he can walk away from and go off and be in silence, the ones he can share a meal with, the ones who he can, turn and study the law and know what that is, but also sit for a while in silence and watch and wait and pray. And whilst I haven't consciously been seeing the things that I do as being the same as what Christ does, I can see that there's real wisdom in those actions. And to me, they're what I have to do to survive. So would that I'd got there by thinking about this wisely, but actually it's just what my body seems to need to do. It needs key friends, it needs accountability, it needs law, it needs prayer, it needs silence, and it needs the land, it needs to ground. And it needs my phone, it needs my WhatsApp messages that will just tell me that my friends, my colleagues are alive.
Thanks, Alison. One of the things that gave me hope on Sunday, when I was at Mass, and at the end of Mass, Mike, who's here tonight, read a document and asked people to sign it that came from the bishops and from Justice and Peace. Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, you can come in. And, it was brought right into the heart of the community and the liturgy, asking people to sign. It was something we could actually do about the darkness and the dreadful events and the need for a ceasefire. And I found that, I found it hopeful. I found it something. It was bringing it in to the faith space and to community and to people's lives to say, well, this is something we can do. And I believe anybody can sign that petition. Is that right, Mike?
The petition we had came from our local churches, from
Right.
Edinburgh churches acting together, and it was very closely based on the Christian Aid statement. So the one that we have is just on paper from our own churches, but the Christian Aid statement is available online on the Christian Aid website. And we based what we had very closely on that, because it was signed by a lot of church leaders, and so that you get over the hurdle of can we trust it?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. I mean, it was a powerful petition, I think. Mike has also put up new document from the Iona community, ways to learn, pray, and act for justice for all in Israel and Palestine. Email if you want to see it, and Mike has left his details, but we might be able to put the link up for that, I'm not sure. And from Trisha here, I graduated from Glasgow and I feel really proud of that tonight. Well done, Alison. I think on that note, we may close our comments and discussions, and it's, for me to thank you at the moment, Alison. It seems, I think an awful lot of people have already expressed much of what I would want to say, but there were a few things that just jumped out at me. And it was, the authentic voices that you're sharing, stories from Gaza, from people, the connections, and actually feeling that in the midst of all this darkness and grievous situation, that if they have voices of peace and hope, then there's hope for all of us. I find that just overwhelming and overwhelmingly humbling. new dawns of peace for them, for people who are sitting in that, to be able to say that, I find awesome and inspiring, and signs of Christ surely in the Spirit in our lives. And also the words of love, justice and freedom, both from themselves and from scriptures. And also, and when we met earlier and discussed this struck me as well, that I now see silence, the law, poetry and prayer, not just as solace, but as acts of resistance to what is happening. And that's what we have, and we have it in abundance. And that's what I think we can use as best we can on our own, or with as many others as we can muster together. So my thanks, my heartfelt thanks. And now I'm going to ask, I think it's Anne, to say a prayer for you, Alison.
Alison, we'd like to say a prayer for you to ask God to bless you. Loving God, we thank you for the insight, wisdom and compassion of Alison. We thank you for what she has shared with us this evening. And we ask that you continue to empower her with your spirit and sustain her with your love. Amen.
Amen. Let's pray for ourselves as we go forth as disciples of Jesus.
Spirit of love, help us to be at one with all those who mourn. Empower us to honour the memory of those who have died by committing ourselves to usher in your reign of peace and justice. Strengthen us and guide us as we confront those who commit or condone genocide or ecocide. Amen.
Amen. So finally, my thanks again to Alison, our dear friend and companion, and to all of you who have joined us tonight. And we hope that you'll join us next Thursday when we welcome as our companion Muriel Pearson, who's been with us this evening, for our second journey in Advent on the same theme. So thank you very much. To those who are leaving the meeting at this point, good night, God bless, and simply log off. And for those who wish to stay on and join a breakout room for a short while, please just stay connected, and hopefully the breakout